Hey, it's Fitz, and if you don't know who I am, here's a quick bio. I'm a veteran sports journalist who writes, does TV, radio, daily YouTube videos, and I'm a longtime podcaster. Also, I have metastatic stage 4 prostate cancer that came out of remission in January of 23. During the pandemic, my doctors advised me to stay at home, and the Life of Fitz podcast was born. My original diagnosis forecast that I would be dead by age 60. But as I start season 5 of this podcast, I am 60 and still calling the many friends, athletes, coaches, colleagues, and medical advisors who I've met throughout my life. Oh, and I'm still hitting the record button and now doing so on video. Welcome to my life and the Life of Fitz podcast. Presented by the great people at Blueville Nursery in Manhattan. In 2017, I made the business decision to move my website, Go Powercat, off of the Rivals Network, which we'd been a member of for about 20 years. We were a founding member of it, and move over to 24/7 Sports. A lot went into it, but one of the big factors was the people at 24/7 Sports. I knew them. I believed in them. They were not just collecting publishers from our industry, but really good ones. I didn't realize how good their talent within the 24/7 office, their structure was. And that's been such a blessing. So 24/7 Sports was a startup and it got bought by CBS, but actually part of their digital arm more than CBS Sports. But 24/7 has been woven into what CBS does. And that's huge. That's unheard of in our industry. And so now publishers get to do stuff that'll be on the CBS Sports HQ, their streaming channel, what's called a FAST channel, free advertising supported television. In other words, what us olds call television. And so we appear on there. There's plans for more of that. We'll see how that pans out. But I've also got to know these incredible journalists or creators that work for 24/7/CBS and do it every day. And one of my absolute favorites is Bud Elliott. He's part of the Cover 3 podcast, which is a CBS show that is one of the biggest college football podcasts out there. And it's also on video, of course, now. And he's just an all-around great guy. An attorney by training, ended up covering Florida State, his alma mater, ended up doing recruiting, and has climbed up, earned it all the way from the start to the point now where he is one of the faces of 24/7 Sports and just a tremendous person. So now let's call my friend, Bud Elliott in Orlando, Florida. And now we bring in my friend, Bud Elliott from Orlando. Bud, thank you so much. And I appreciate you matching my set.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm glad we get to connect. It's been busy, but good busy.
Yeah, this summer. But Bud, am I crazy, or did the summers used to be slow, almost a struggle to find things to talk about in the few moments you are actually working and not trying to take a vacation? It used to be slow.
It definitely used to be slower. I think I've always done like recruiting, and then I've done more college, in the last like probably 5 to 7 years. So like, man, like we used to have kind of more of a break during the season if you were more of a recruiting guy. And then,
Yeah.
But now it's kind of year round. And I don't know if you've looked forward to December yet, but I've been talking to our team for a Cover 3 podcast. My guys, we need to kind of figure out, like, if we want to all avoid divorces, like when do we want to take some time off in December? Because signing day the first week, and then we have playoffs like all around Christmas, all around New Year's, and then it's right into Under Armour game, All American Bowl, and then coaching conventions. So I'm like, that December 13th week, let's just run the best of the show and just kind of, if we can take a week off, let's take it off.
And talking to Chris Kleiman, that's the problem. They used to, as coaches, used to have some time off, and now it's just a wall of work.
It's crazy.
Transfer portal, you got to start worrying about that. It's just a mess. I don't know.
It's crazy, man. It
keeps me out of trouble. I haven't been in jail all summer.
Ditto that.
I brag about the little things.
How was Vegas?
Vegas was good. I know Brett Yormark likes to do things big and flashy. I get it. He likes to, try to put a forward facing thing that we're just as equal as everyone else. But Coach, why do we have this? Or hey, Commissioner, why do we have this on a field on which no Big 12 team will play? Which would have been the same as like the Bellagio ballroom. No one's going to play there either, and we don't have to travel to it. We just come down the elevator. I don't know.
I think that's fair. Yormark, I have some questions about, but I do think he's a heck of a showman.
Yes.
And, if like they could probably put SEC on the moon and you would get a lot of your national outlets to go, right?
Yeah.
But, Big 12, people have to make choices. Like I wanted to go on Big 12. I was actually out of the country for a little bit. But Vegas is relatively easy to get to for a lot of folks. And it's also like, if you're expensing a work trip, it's like, oh, I got to go to Vegas for work. So, maybe you get some of the more, ESPN guys out there to go. I don't know who ESPN sent, but maybe they're able to, entice a couple more voices to go out there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was interesting to see who was out there, but also I was curious if it had been in Dallas, we would have gotten a good idea of how much the departure of Texas in particular, but Oklahoma also impacted the attendance at this event. And being in Vegas, you couldn't really tell if it was that or something else, but it was down. And I think a lot of it was travel. In Texas, so many media outlets exist covering college football or pretending to cover college football that can just drive. And they weren't going to do that for Vegas.
I think from I don't run a team site anymore, but I did for about a decade, and I wonder, do we need media days in the traditional format now with the, all the different kinds of access points we have and all the things? I think they're still good. Like personally, if I didn't have to do Big Ten, and I'm very blessed that I get to be on that platform for CBS, but if I didn't have to do Big Ten, I would have run the Conference USA, Sun Belt, Mountain West circuit, because those are schools that in our travel budget, I'm not going to get to visit all those schools in an off season. I mean, I don't get to visit all of them anyway, but they're definitely not going to send me to, Logan, Utah, right? I could hit a bunch of those coaches who will probably be some of the next star coaches in the sport in a decade or maybe shorter than that, and just kind of get to meet them, and I've done them before. And I think they're so open. Like what they call the American before it was the American, I
don't even remember that.
Kind of the Big East, right? They used to do a clam bake up on Cape Cod. It was it was amazing. And just everybody just sits around, drinks beer and shoots the breeze about their team. And you really got to learn a lot. And it was so relaxed that's why I think SEC is the worst because the access is zero. If you're not a network partner, which now it's just ESPN, I mean, any kind of cool, unique question you ask, it's in front of 1,000 people in the room and however many people watching online on SC Network. Good luck writing a unique story off a question that everybody already heard, right?
That's one of the things I love about the Big 12 is that we had almost every K-State player on our Big 12 Insider show. We had Coach Kleiman on it exclusively, and they're accessible. You can get to them. I probably could have gotten Brett Yormark if I had put in a little bit more effort. I didn't. It was the first time I've done video at one of these things, and I was old man versus technology. Something I'm up against every day is trying to figure out why isn't stuff working. But that's me.
The best experience I've ever had at a media day is recent, not like the old school where you can just, because AC used to do a golf tournament with all the coaches, which was pretty cool. But last year at Pac-12, so all the TV networks, they have their own room. And most of the time, they're not really staffed, but by more than just a production assistant who's remote. And he's asking them all the B-roll type questions that you might use if you have them on CBS Sports Network or whatever network you happen to work for. And each coach is blocked for 30 minutes. And there's only 6 minutes of questions. So it's I'm just going to park myself here in this CBS room because I'm CBS. And I just cool. I get Dan Lanning just chatting with him, not on camera for 25 minutes, just kind of learning what this guy's about. And for most everybody that was in the Pac-12 last year, I was able to get it. This works out pretty well.
You sneaky. That's a veteran move. That's beautiful.
I was oh, my credential says CBS. Doesn't really say which CBS room I have to be in. So here I
am. You're more CBS than me, but I'll still play that card when I need to.
Absolutely.
I got a hand-me-down CBS Sports hat that's really pretty sweet. And people always, do you work for CBS Sports? Well, yes, I do. I mean, I'm not going to take a moment to explain the cab driver. Well, I have a site. They did, it's too confusing. I'll just have the flex and pretend they don't need to know the truth.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to your days as a publisher. I take it was a Florida State site.
Yep. Yeah. For SB Nation, started it back in 2007 and just got very blessed and lucky to come along, really, which was like the final 4 seasons of Bobby Bowden. So got to cover him. And then, we were so new on the block that we didn't really have like the long standing relationships with Bowden, who was a legend. And I think in some ways, we definitely could have been more tactful in how we covered it. But like my experience at Florida State, they sucked when I was there. Right. So I was like, man, like I know this guy's won a million games, but it's clearly a bit of like an emperor's no clothes situation here at this point. And, I had some buddies who, were playing or coaching at other schools. And I was like, I don't think Florida State's doing some of the things that they're doing at some of these little more modern programs at this time. And then spun to the Jameis years. And that was a wild thing to cover. We broke crab legs. That was good. And then the public information officer for TPD was like not in that morning. So everybody had to aggregate us like crazy. And SB Nation, back when they still did sports, I guess they still kind of do, but they had to increase their chart beat subscription like 4 or 5 times that day because like you're on the front page of ESPN and AOL and
Crazy.
And they're all crediting the site I ran. So it was fun.
I've never reported on a man with crabs in his pants.
That was literally I had to call Winn-Dixie, which is a different grocery chain down here. I don't know if you guys have Winn-Dixie in Kansas.
I know what they are though.
Because the initial story was basically like, I'm trying to remember it, but they were saying that at Winn-Dixie, you paid for it at the seafood counter. And thus, like, you didn't put it on the belt at the main checkout thing, but at Publix, you put it all and you pay for it all at the end. So typically a Winn-Dixie shopper happened to be in Publix, said whatever the real story was there. Yeah.
And they just ended up in his pants.
Yeah. Just walked out and,
I mean, it's happened to all of us. It's happened to all of us. I had that same thing happen at a new car lot. Just walked out with the new car in my pants by accident.
That's awesome.
So where did you transition out of that? Because that can be an all-encompassing, something happened like that, I'm working. It's you're always on deadline. I got into this business. Well, I got into the magazine business not to be on deadline and ended up in a field where you're always on deadline because if something happens, go.
So a lot of it was that we were not super highly staffed back then at SB. And so they would take some of the more prominent voices in the team site, blogosphere, and they would have us, write certain things or go cover certain things. And I did a lot of our recruiting coverage because I was based in Florida and really was our only recruiting guy for the longest time. So they're like, hey, if you're willing to do the travel and at that point, single with no kids. So you can really go and do an insane amount of travel. And then, kind of got into more like the betting space doing it and talking about like recruiting analytics and trying to just tell the story of college football and weave together the bigger picture, like, hey, that's kind of one of the reasons why I invented blue chip ratio. I've talked to Stu Mandel about this before, and I remember reading a column. He's like, I have Wisconsin as my, my national champion. I was like, Stu, come to like one recruiting camp and see the type of bodies that like an Ohio State or Alabama signs, and you'll never pick Wisconsin to win the national championship again. And then it's like just so some stuff like that, but it definitely ruffled feathers. But I think it's a pretty decent theory that eventually we'll get busted. I think maybe Ole Miss gets me this year. Maybe Florida State would have got me last year. But that's sort of how I transitioned into it. And then I started podcasting some with like Richard Johnson and Stephen Godfrey and Bill Connolly a little bit. And it was a good time. And Connolly's still one of my best friends in the industry today.
You learned a lot of tools.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people in our industry who are recruiting people or team coverage, and by being the boss or whatever you consider yourself to be, you had to do it all. And I kind of feel the same way.
Exactly. And it's if you're at a more traditional outlet, I don't think it can happen that fast because I don't think you have the vertical mobility, right? It's like, why did you get to go cover the Orange Bowl? Oh, because we didn't have anybody to do it. You know what I mean? It's not Wally pipped, but I guess if you were at a more traditional outlet, it would probably take longer.
Yeah,
they're just like, hey, Bud lives in Florida. Bud, go cover this. I was like, all right, cool, let's do it.
That's not fair, man. You get to live in Florida, my birth state. I don't know if you knew that. And then cover cool shit. I don't understand, man. It's not fair. I don't have any bowls in Kansas.
My dad's sister, they lived in Florida, and then they had to move out to Wichita because he was the chief flight test engineer for Bombardier, which I guess they do a lot of flight testing in Kansas because it's very flat and wind conditions are conducive for testing all sorts of things and a bunch of other stuff. And for the longest, man, they hated Kansas, and now they're like, bro, Kansas is great. Like, they haven't moved back, and it's so I get to hear a lot of the good stuff about Kansas, and I'm like, I'm sold.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It feels like Florida outside right now. It's about 95 degrees, and it feels like the humidity is around 65. I don't know why Kansas has humidity. Can we have some water if we're going to have humidity, not just like reservoirs that the government made?
This is what I tell my wife all the time. Like, look, we're blessed that we have the grandparents very close, so they can help us, with the babysitting. But it's hot as hell here, babe, and we're not really that close to the water in Orlando. I'm not a lake guy. Like, I think lakes in the Midwest are so cool, and lakes in Florida, I'm like, absolutely not. No, if you grow up on the ocean, I don't want to do lakes.
Well, plus we don't have gators
and snakes,
and,
snapping turtles.
Yeah, that actually snapping turtles would be worse. They look all friendly and then they snap. That's why they have the name. I don't know if you knew that. But yeah, I'm not big on swimming with gators. It just seems like a bad idea. I don't know. And they've been spotted now in Oklahoma. They're coming for me, man. What? Yeah.
Maybe it's all of the anacondas in the Everglades pushing them north.
It could be. Could be. Did you release one of those anacondas into the Everglades?
No, I'm not really an exotic pet guy. So speaking of Florida, we bought my son an ant farm because that's a pretty low lift thing to have. You have 2 kids under 5. And they will not ship me the ants until the temperature is lower here because they die in the shipping process because it's too hot in those trucks. I'm like, what? But
that's the most boring ant colony ever.
That's what I'm saying. So we got a thing sitting in the boys' room. It's got a bunch of sand and no ants yet. And I'm like, hey guys, and they're like, Mr. Elliott, the temperature is 97 degrees all this week, so we're not shipping them yet.
No, get tougher ants.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you got a hookup, if anybody listening to this would be the most random connection. But if you have a hookup for the type of ants that live in an ant farm, because they're not just regular ants, in Orlando, hit me up on Twitter and let me know because I'll go drive over there and get them.
Hey, folks in Texas, could you send Bud some fire ants? Send those to him. Let them get out of the boys' room.
We did those in my house for sure. That was an adventure.
Yes. So when exactly did you come to 24/7? What was your next step, I guess?
So Shannon brought me over. He's now at On3, and I had known I'd known Barton for a while, and we would always DM and text and whatnot about various like stuff in the recruiting space. I would see almost all the 24/7 guys at these events. It's like I knew Tom Loy, I knew Ivins, I knew Wiltfong, I knew Barton, I knew Huff and Biggins and all those guys because I was the only guy for for SB Nation covering recruiting at the time. And it was like a 100 hotel night type travel job for a couple years. And I like that more 60 range hotel night a lot better than 100 plus. Like 100 plus that's rough.
It's good for the awards.
It is. Yeah.
You get lots of points.
Hey, I'm shoot, who did I talk to? I think, is it Dodd that he's like lifetime titanium? Like, bro, that's amazing. You just set your own checkout time. He's like, yeah, we go to a beach hotel, check out 7 o'clock. I'm like, that's nice to be able to come back, take a shower, before you head to the airport. But so I knew a lot of these guys, and I knew like, okay, where's a place I could go to? I was happy at SB Nation as long as they kept investing and growing the product. And then the last 2 years, obviously, we've seen kind of unfortunate downfall. We had like a lot of sites, and I was bummed, man. Like I brought in a lot of those sites, or at least had a part in a good number of them, along with a couple other guys as well who helped build it out. But you could kind of sense they were not supporting it at the same level they once did, and they had a change of ownership. And I was like, I want to be a place that cares about sports and has an awesome network of team sites we can work with, and that was 24/7 just made sense.
I was one of the founding sites on Rivals in 98-ish. It was really cool. I mean, you were kind of in your own space. It was a space that, Jim Heckman kind of started, but Shannon perfected. And that was really cool. But you never felt connected to anything. You were just Rivals.
Yeah.
And the thing I like about my move to 24/7 in 2017 is I truly believe it's the only place in our industry where you feel not just connected to the mothership, which CBS, whether interactive or sports or whatever we fall under, but you feel valued by them. They see you as important. They can understand what you're doing and how it impacts them and their bottom line. And that's incredible, man, to have a corporate structure that, because in the big corporate CBS, Viacom, Paramount, whatever they are, we're a fart in the wind. I mean, we really are. We're just tiny, but they do value us like we all value farts in the wind. I don't know where that metaphor went, Bud, but it just went off the rails.
Well, so Sam Webb, our Michigan publisher, right? Like our schedules have been crazy, and we do our summer school series, which we did an awesome job on. I had not done a Michigan one yet because Sam and I could our schedules just didn't match up. Like we have to have a Michigan. I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Let's do it live on cable television at Big Ten Media Day. I was like, that's the kind of exposure I think that a lot of, as you mentioned, like connected to the mothership, that is hard to get elsewhere unless they have a secret cable network I don't know about. So that was a cool experience. I think really speaks to your point there.
Well, when exactly did you end up on the Cover 3 podcast? Because that thing isn't only one of the bigger college football podcasts. It's really good.
So I appreciate that. So Barton and I had a side podcast, the Barton and Bud podcast, which was really, really like in the weeds, nerdy, personnel issues, some schemes and stuff like that. And then when Barton left for Vandy, they were like, hey, do you want to keep Barton and Bud going? And this was right after COVID. I got hired at 24/7, and 8 days later, the world shut down with COVID. So it was a really weird time to get hired. But I was thankful that I got in just under the gun there. But they're like, hey, we can either try to keep Barton and Bud going, or we can just kind of shelve the feed. We don't need to delete it. And why don't you just replace Barton on Cover 3 until we figure out what we're going to do with all this stuff? I was like, yeah, let's try it out. And then it ended up being great. The audience, I think they always miss Barton, but they seem to really have embraced it.
No, you're the level-headed one. I guess. I don't know.
Depends on which fan base I've pissed off most recently.
I know. Is it possible not to piss off a fan base during an hour-long, like one fan base, just random fan base? Someone's always going to be mad at you in a 1-hour podcast or 45-minute podcast about sports. You're going to piss someone off.
Well, and when you give picks, there's kind of two ways you can do it. Like, oh, I'm picking this because I love this team, but oftentimes I may not love a team. I just might think like, hey, there's just no chance in hell this team can block this other team, right? Like that, and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, because let me see. I review my summer school notes here. You guys said you're super thin there, and you've had 2 season-ending injuries at that position that you were super thin at in the first week. So unless you got some like secret offensive lineman I don't know about, y'all are about to have a rough 10 weeks, and it stinks, but. Football's a collision sport, not a contact sport, and injuries happen.
I know.
I was talking to a guy who covers the NFL today. He's like, why do you think college fans get so more pissed off at you, like long term, if you say something? And I'm like, dude, nobody went to the University of Chicago Bears, okay? Yep. But if you say something about Kansas State, like that is personal because there's a degree on your wall from K-State. So I think they take it a little more personally and kind of hold that grudge longer term, I think.
I agree. That's exactly what it is. And even if you didn't go to the school, you've got some tighter connection than just being a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs, which is fun right now, but you had to wear through some bad times. And college, you just ride through it. That's my school. I don't care if we're 1-11 last year. Well, we're going to be good this year. Right. You always have that optimism. I know that because I covered Kansas State and I went there.
I mean, And like, talk about a program that has had some real lows and then some
Mm.
incredible highs. I mean, like what Snyder did with Kansas State is we were talking about like the most underrated coaches of like the last half century. I mean, Snyder doesn't get talked about on a weekly basis, but probably should with what he did.
Yep.
You know, Jeff Tedford, like the guy, like never had a bad offense basically ever, has had like, you know, when he retired, I was like, look at this guy, he just takes over programs that are hard to win at and wins. Like that ain't easy.
Yeah, but like Bowden, I mean, you brought it up. Eventually, you could see times slipping past them, and they needed to change, and they couldn't quite. And I'm just, Bill stepped down right before COVID.
Yeah,
and I can't imagine what it would have been like to have an almost 80-year-old coach during a pandemic. And all the changes, he didn't like change. He just it would have just driven him crazy. So I think he was blessed to have stepped away before that. Let's take a short break and hear from our sponsor, Blueville Nursery.
For competitively priced landscape design, irrigation, and lawn maintenance, turn to Blueville Nursery, a family-owned business with more than 50 years of experience. You can trust the Blueville team to design and create a landscape that will accentuate your property's aesthetics. And visit our garden store 6 days a week for the best products in the area. From ornamental trees, shrubs, and flowers, Blueville has it all. Blueville Nursery, located on West Anderson Avenue in Manhattan, Kansas.
Now, let's return to the studio.
I'm really excited about Kansas State this year, by the way. I play a lot of like college fantasy, Avery Johnson every time, like 15th overall, 14th overall. I'm like, let's go. This kid. I was there for the Pop-Tart Bowl. Took my son, and because my neighbor's on the bowl committee, so we had a little sweet little setup, and dude's got wheels. I mean, and everybody watched Kansas State last year, but as an ACC guy, like I'm watching, NC State has some real speed on defense, and they are never bad on defense. He's outrunning them. Okay, noted. Like this guy can outrun like legitimate future NFL players. That they got something there.
I don't think K-State's a slow team, and yet the fastest guy on the team is the quarterback. I never really heard that from a team that has speed.
Who's the last guy we could say is like legitimate? Like who's the last quarterback of a good college football team where the quarterback was the fastest player? Like not like a Jacksonville State, G5 where they said Lamar?
Yeah, that's a good choice. I was thinking Vince at Texas, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, that dude can flat run, and he gets to his top speed quickly. I'm excited. Look, but I've never covered a student athlete with this kind of buzz. And look, basketball, I had Michael Beasley, who had a lot of buzz, but that's basketball. There's just something, that extra oomph about college football. And this kid has caught the nation's attention at a really early age, because everyone who sees him believes. Yeah. Everyone who takes a moment to watch goes, oh, okay. But I've never been around this. And he's almost like the perfect kid to handle it, because he's like, okay. I'm just going to take whatever comes.
I mean, there's 3 guys out there young guys, who I think either did push out or likely would have pushed out the incumbent starter. And everywhere, like all 3 of those incumbent starters stayed in college ball. All 3 teams to which they went are really excited. Oregon's very excited about Dylan Gabriel. Got pushed out by Arnold, I think. Yep. Florida State, Mike Norvell said DJ is much better than we anticipated him being today. Like they're very excited about him. I think Childs was likely going to beat him out at Oregon State. Now he's at Michigan State, obviously, and that's a rebuilding situation. And then, Ohio State, they firmly believe Howard is an upgrade over McCord. So what does it say about those 3 young guys that they pushed out, 3 quarterbacks that national title or playoff contending teams are excited to go get?
It's crazy. It's crazy. When I look at the Heisman odds, and in the top 12, I see both Will Howard and Avery Johnson. I'm like, I don't think we fully appreciated how incredible that quarterback room was, because Will wasn't the only one who transferred. Every other scholarship quarterback transferred out because they knew they weren't going to play unless Avery was injured. And, and that happens. I was really surprised one of them didn't stick around because of that.
Yeah. So I try to remember what we said on summer school. Doing 70 of these, they do start to run together in my brain a little bit. But like, not to make this totally K-State focused, if we can, if we want. How much load management do they have to do with him?
Yeah.
Like they got to gear down as far as the design runs in some of these games, right?
Right. That's going to be, I think, the greatest balancing act because he's got that speed and that elusiveness where he doesn't often take direct hits, but sometimes you can't avoid it. And the last thing this program wants is him injured, even if it means he's just slowed up, he's gimpy. And that just seems to happen a lot. So trying to figure out when to run this kid, they really didn't want to run him in the Pop-Tarts Bowl because they didn't have essentially a backup. They had a walk-on backup that had been redshirting. So they're going to have to figure that out because he's going to also have a lot of undesigned runs that just got a new offensive line. Crap, they missed that guy. Off I go. And I think that's going to really help that line. It's going to be a level of forgiveness that, Michael Bishop had. I got loose and I just ran for 1,000,000 yards. And that's what Avery can do. But if he gets his bell rung, you're in trouble. You are.
He's probably drop off from like a point spread type thing. I mean, there are very few quarterbacks I think you would actually reduce a team's power rating by like a full touchdown.
Yeah.
I think he's on like him, Salter at Liberty, I mean, so I think Salter is really good. And the fact that he plays in Conference USA, like that just makes them basically unbeatable. They screwed around in 2 games last year and still won comfortably, and I mean, then Oregon waxed them, but that's a little bit different class of athlete. There are not many that I think you would like reduce a full touchdown, but I think Avery's on that list.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, like Taquan Roberson comes in from UConn and he's an athlete that can replicate some of it, but he's not it's not going to be the same. Because I think the greatest secret people don't know, and they just assume, oh, he runs real fast. He's really good. He's a running quarterback. He's not a running quarterback. He can throw the ball around the field. And they told him at the Pop-Tarts Bowl, don't throw it into coverage unless we absolutely have to. Just throw it away. And he did. He had the discipline to continue to do that. His discipline as a player and as a person at 19 years old or whatever he is remarkable. As his dad told one of my guys, he's always the adult in the room, even when it's his own house. It's just an amazing young man.
And that's what good coaches do. I mean, look at what West Virginia did after about 4 or 5 games with Garrett Green. Like, oh, you don't really read the middle of the field. They went to basically a threes and dunks approach last year. He's like, all right, throw it way over the top. So if you throw a pick, it's like a 50-yard pick, or throw screens or run around. Like that's a bit reductive, but it's not too far away from what they ended up changing up to.
But what I love about him and Iowa State's quarterback, I've said this over and over, they're warriors. They don't do it by conventional means. They just bleed until they get a first down. And I love that. That's Colin Klein. That's what he did. He wasn't known as a great thrower, but he'd get out there and somehow he'd get 1 inch beyond the 6 every time and keep moving the ball, keep moving the chains.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm excited about this season in a way that I've never really experienced in my career because I've never accepted, certainly over the last 4 years, that Texas and Oklahoma were the Big 12. I mean, as I said on our Big 12 Insider show earlier this week, look, over the last 4 years, there's been 4 different conference champions. And the only school to go to 2 championship games were Oklahoma State, and they're not one of the champions. This conference really got competitive towards the end, particularly after Oklahoma downgraded. But with all that said, it's just so strange to look at a schedule without those kind of touchstones of Oklahoma's here, Texas is here. Because that's particularly Oklahoma. That's been my entire experience covering Kansas State is Oklahoma is going to probably be on that schedule. And what do you have around that? And now you just have a bunch of unknowns, particularly not playing Utah. You just don't know how good Arizona and Kansas and Iowa State and West Virginia are all going to be. And some of them are going to be pretty good, I bet.
Also, Arizona's the non-conference game, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Arizona is saying all the right things about Ted McMillan, but your chance of making it as an at-large, if you're Arizona, is relatively low, right?
Yeah.
But your chance of making it to the college football playoff as Big 12 champion is 100% if you do win it. I mean, are we 100% sure that he's going to play the first couple games? Like I'm not. I'm waiting to read some more practice reports and just kind of see because I mean that's probably the best receiver in the country if it's not Luther Bird, and I mean that really matters. I've got K-State favored in all 12 games.
I'd agree.
Not by a lot, but they're slightly green on the schedule sheet, kind of light shades of green and then red and then kind of yellow for that toss up. But they could put something together really special here if they stay healthy.
Well, considering that maybe their two most competitive games in actual conference play would be Oklahoma State and Kansas, and those games are in Manhattan. I suspect Iowa State's going to be really good.
Yeah.
And so closing the season in Ames in late November is going to be lovely. First of all, I got to remember to pack my sunblock. And it can't be worse than last year, which was a blizzard.
Snow game.
Never seen anything like it. But yeah, it's going to be a chilly day in Ames, which happens quite often in Ames. So
the one thing I like
huge.
A lot for Kansas State there is the run up. You get Houston, bye week, Arizona State, Cincinnati. And I think Cincinnati is probably actually a lot improved, and so that won't be a cakewalk, but it could be.
Right.
And I think Arizona State and Houston are clearly the bottom of the league. Like they're both in a hard rebuild. Avery should have very fresh legs, knock on wood, in Ames. You're getting a month where his carries should not be high. Obviously, in the bye week, there should be 0, but not too many carries needed, most likely in those ball games.
Nope, shouldn't be. Or he just goes wild like he did with Texas Tech.
Yeah. That was the craziest game.
He's running again. It's a touchdown. Sets first significant playing time in college football, ties the school record. What the heck? Have you seen his new car? The lavender Corvette?
Yes, dude. That is, that tells me that's not a guy that minds the spotlight.
No.
Right?
No.
Not that he's craving the attention, but if you're a guy that if you don't like the spotlight, you're like, can I get like a black or a white one? Like not, because now everybody knows. And you can't drive like you play at Georgia, obviously, because they're going to know it's you.
No, you just shouldn't drive that way no matter who you are.
This is true.
But yeah, I guess it's something, I struggled with beautiful hair in my youth. When you have that kind of hair, everyone recognizes you anyhow. So yeah, he's probably used to it. Let's talk about the Florida State ACC situation a little bit, because I'm fascinated by this, and I've never seen a conference member go to war with their own conference and the commissioner firing live rounds back at them like this. It's unprecedented as far as I know, but it's a little bit awkward too.
Very. So Florida State wants to get out of the ACC, right? Their actions and their words, if you watch like the board of trustees meetings, they're very concerned that in 4 to 5 years, it's going to be a $50 million revenue gap,
right,
between them and the SEC and the Big Ten. Now, they still play good football. They probably got screwed out of the playoff last year.
Absolutely did.
I understand the whole argument of their quarterback being hurt, obviously, but they think at a certain point, if you're trying to play, at like the national title level, $50 million is kind of night. If it's that big of a gap. Can you ask your boosters and your collective to match, to make up a $50 million revenue? No, like that's just not going to happen. So, they proposed sort of a Texas style, hey, like let's have unequal revenue sharing and all that kind of stuff. And I think the ACC, anticipating Florida State was trying to leave, they went and added more members because at the time they were worried there were 8 schools that were going to try to leave, which would have broken the grant of rights, because if more than half left, that would break it. However, adding 3 more schools gives you a larger quorum to where those 8 schools would not represent more than it had to be half plus 1 of the schools that were trying to leave. So I think that move by the ACC really pissed off Clemson and Florida State quite a bit. They're like, oh, okay, so you're trying to lock us in and not support Clemson, not support Florida State at the revenue level that they feel that they need to keep carrying the conference, So I just think they have different goals than the vast majority of the teams in that league. Like that makes it fundamentally different than the Big 12. Like the Big 12 has a bunch of good to really good teams, and none that I really think are national title caliber from a recruiting standpoint. Like obviously, it's, you got a lot of Big 12 listeners, but when I look at the data, I'm like, okay, the ACC has like 2 and a half, because in theory, if Miami ever got their act together, they do have the ability to acquire talent at that national title level. There's a bunch of other things they would need to do as well that they don't often do, and haven't for like 20 years. But can those schools keep competing on that level in the long term? I don't think so at that level if they're that much behind in revenue. So it really just comes down to money, and I don't think they want to have to cut so many sports to just maintain football only. Like they're already pretty terrible in basketball and will be probably until they have a legendary coach, Leonard Hamilton, who's done a great job, and eventually he'll kind of work his way out. But right now they're like just supporting football and baseball. Like basketball is like not even really an option.
That's crazy. The whole thing. I've never seen a conference. Basically, their business plan right now is to hold 2 members hostage and tie them up in the basement so they can't leave. It's like that doesn't seem like a good way to manage a conference, but okay. And then adding why did they add Cal and Stanford? I mean,
I think literally just for the votes.
Yep, and also we should always remember chancellors and presidents are actually in charge. So they probably puffed out their chest that they added 2 elite academic institutions, and everyone else was like, so,
Right.
They're not very good in football and basketball. That's kind of important here. They don't pull great ratings. They don't have very good attendance. Those things are important, but they're now the All Coast Conference. So there they are. They're in California, which makes so much sense.
It's have you seen Cal's travel schedule this year?
No, it's unbelievable.
It's nuts. And Stanford has a crazy one too. And Stanford actually leads the nation in the number of opponents who have a bye week before they play Stanford. 6 teams get a bye.
How's that possible?
I looked at it this morning. I was like, damn, like you get all that travel and everybody you play is fresh. Good luck with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see them after a couple seasons going, how is this in the best interest of our student athletes? Because if it really is about academics at these institutions, that's not good for those kids' academics. I can tell you that.
Right.
So I don't know. Unless the ACC can resolve something, and oddly, the Big 12 showed how to do it. You do give a little bit. You do maintain the structure for as long as you can, and then maybe you build up enough strength to survive the departure.
Right.
Which is exactly why the Big 12 is still here. They got blood out 3 times, and they were able to recover from each one of those and add schools or just move on and be leaner and meaner. But that's what the ACC needs to replicate. I don't know, man. I just want the courts to give a ruling here. Just quit dragging this thing out.
Good luck with that. The other thing, if you watched Jim Phillips' comments at ACC Media Day, he was in an unwinnable catch-22 situation because Yormark basically checkmated him with this we're the 3rd best conference stuff.
Yep.
Now, I think from like an average team rating, the Big 12, depending on the year, probably has a good argument for that, actually. And I'm pretty fired up to watch Big 12 games this year because I think they're really super competitive and like exciting. And when we do our Saturday night recap on Cover 3, we're probably putting 4 or 5 Big 12 games on the rundown that were good games to watch. Maybe one of them blows out, but like most of them be pretty good. The thing with Phillips, he had a chance to counter, and his counter was weak because he really couldn't give shine to Florida State and Clemson, right?
Right.
He couldn't be like, oh, really? Well, hey, Big 12, how many national titles have y'all won in the 85 scholarship era with these teams? 0. How many have Florida State and Clemson combined for? Like 6, right? So, or 5. I mean, but the problem is you would have to give credit to the differentiators of your league who are actually currently suing you. So he's kind of like, it's very clear that we are the 3rd best league. I'm like, why? Well, right.
Yep.
You can't say it.
Well, and from his standpoint, all that keeps ACC on par in football, which we admit is the more important sport. I don't want to agree with it, but it's obvious that if you move those schools into the Big 12, there's a huge disparity between the two.
Yeah.
And it might close the gap a little bit. If he does this thing with basketball, it might close the gap even more, but I don't think you'll ever close the gap all the way. It's just, they just got too big of a lead financially.
I tend to agree. And I think a lot of programs out there right now are very intent on having really good teams for like the next 5 or so years, because you need to sort of establish, you want to kind of make yourself to use that like Wall Street term, kind of too big to fail. Like, hey, we are so good. You can't possibly leave Florida State out. You can't possibly leave Kansas State out of whatever Super League, if it forms, right? They would just be ridiculous. Of course, you have to invite this team or that team. I think that's why it's really important to be on good footing for like the next half decade or so, because we know that you have SEC and Big Ten contracts ending within the next decade.
Are you a fan of the Chip Kelly model that just goes into, there's no conferences for football. You're just in this league together and you're divided up regionally for scheduling?
I for a certain number, I think, yeah. I am more a fan of, if you're not competing for a national championship, then I think you should really be trying to compete for some sort of regional championship. People like to win things.
Right.
Now, look, South Carolina fans will tell me, hey, the attendance makes you a liar on this. We do enjoy this. I'm like, really? Like, y'all have never won anything or even come close to winning in this league ever. Arkansas, kind of the same way, right? Is that fun? Is that a fun existence? Like, you can beat your chest about SEC, but you guys never have a chance to win. You get dominated by the height, weight, speed game. So I think for like your top, 30 or so programs out there, I think it kind of makes sense to play other programs that have that height, weight, speed on their roster. And I do kind of think everybody else should probably play more regional, like conference format. But I think for the other sports, one of my good friends is UCF's director of tennis. And there's a lot of good tennis in the Big 12. And so he's like, but dude, the travel is quite a bit, So I think it's really hard for some of these Olympic sports to travel. Like, you're sending your volleyball team from Tallahassee to Stanford. Guys, there ain't no direct flights from Tallahassee to Palo Alto, right? Or, Clemson, South Carolina to the Bay Area. What are we doing here? That's not a good business model for sports.
No, it's not. And yeah, I don't know where we're headed. I think they want to break off, but I think at the end of the day, it's all about business. Yeah. And I think if you leave schools out and just say it's going to be Big Ten and SEC, everyone else related to college football will be like, fine, we'll just watch stuff that involves our teams.
Yeah.
It won't be like 1AA/FCS football that doesn't have huge fan bases. Some of these schools have pretty good fan bases. Pretty, certainly not Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, none of that. But you're going to have a lot of people say, okay, we're going to watch the games that impact my team. And whether that's a bowl structure, playoff structure, I don't know. But I don't think football's going away for a lot of schools. And I think it's a risky model, to be honest, to go to the almost semi-pro football model.
I do too. It's also one of the reasons why I thought 4 was a uniquely harmful number of playoff teams to have for the sport.
Right.
You were automatically excluding a conference, but also, right. You knew it was when networks are shelling out this amount of money for playoff rights, every single chance they get, they're hyping who's in. I'm like, guys, that makes like a lot of these November games, they're downplaying the meaningfulness of these games when they're good games that you should appreciate. But a lot of, like halftime of Kansas, Oklahoma State, right? They're talking about who's in, is Alabama in? I'm like, guys, can we talk about the game that just got played? It was a good first half. Like, why do we have to beat you over the head? So exclusionary to the point to where people stop giving a damn about like the Orange Bowl and the Peach Bowl and the Cotton Bowl. Like, those are, for almost all of our life, Tim, those mattered. So that I think at least with 12, if we have 12 slots, that means in the month of November, we have about 30 teams that are legitimately have a shot to make it to 12. Right. So 12 slots, we used to have like 6 bowl games we really, really cared about from a national perspective. So that'd be 12 slots in those bowl games. I think it's 12 just kind of gets us back to where we were as far as how many teams still had something to cheer about from a national perspective down the stretch. So that's the main reason. I just thought 4 sucked personally. I was like, this is terrible.
I agree. I always thought that. I thought, okay, you're going to go to 2 to 4. You're not really solving anything, because the arguments between 4 and 5, as we saw this year, are still substantial. The argument between 12 and 13 is not. You'll have people bitching, but it's not going to be, well, yeah, you're the 13th seed. You would surely won the national title. Let's be honest. It's probably not going to happen unless it's somehow an SEC team who lost some games early and gathered themselves and turned into a great football team that goes in at 9-3 or something. It's just no one that seated that low is going to make a push, but I think Florida State could have won it this year. We just won't know.
Nobody at Florida State would ever admit this on the record, but I really do think that they were going to have a conversation about boycotting a BCS game had they not been placed in the Orange Bowl, a place that has significant ties to the program. The new president of the Orange Bowl actually played for Bobby Bowden, big. So they didn't have any choice but to go down there and play that game. But I mean, you could have pulled we've seen this before. It's like, oh, we don't have enough players to play type thing.
Yeah.
Because they were really pissed about getting left out. And even then, I don't know very many, 13-0, celebrate that team. I don't know very many Noles who went down into that game.
No.
Not many players, obviously.
No.
With the result that they had.
Okay, let's wrap up with an idea I blatantly stole from you. Thank you very much. About the Big 12 leaning into sports betting. And I just kind of get this feeling Brett Yormark is on board with that. And that's why media days were in Vegas, part of it. That connecting to that, look, you're not going to make fans from other teams say, I'm switching to Kansas State. It's just not going to happen. But sports bettors are very mobile. They'll I'm going to be watching this App State game because I got money on it. If you can leverage that, you're going to pick up a big chunk of viewers watching your games. And I pushed your idea of they need to have a sports betting expert available out of, maybe it's same place where the official, the rules expert is located that can update what's going on with prop bets and where everything is in the lines. And I think it's brilliant.
I couldn't agree more. Also, I think the video game coming along when it did is going to help this a lot to your point about the prop bets. The collective college ball consciousness is going to have a lot more familiarity with individual players as opposed to just jerseys now that there are so many people playing this. I mean, I can see the analytics. Nobody was reading a damn thing from SEC Media Day, Tim. I mean, they were all just, if you wrote anything related to EA Sports, the numbers were nuts, but the, actual quotes and stuff. And, it was our chat on Cover 3, people were talk about the video game. We're trying to talk about college football here, but it will create a lot more knowledge about players on your team, but also players on other teams. If you're a Kansas State fan, maybe you think that the quarterback of Boise is total sick because you've been playing with him, right? Mm-hmm. I think with just how exciting and close a lot of these Big 12 games will be, and the fact that a lot of the teams in the Big 12 do play different styles as well, I think it's really a fun opportunity to embrace the down to the wire finish. I mean, the Big Ten has some great jerseys, and big time brand names, but I know Tom Fornelli wrote an article about this. Big Ten has the most blowouts by far. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the SEC is second, and then the ACC third, and then the Big 12 by far the fewest. They're playing a lot of tight games down to the wire. That creates opportunities.
I got to tell you, first of all, I had a gaming addiction in the early 90s that almost led to a divorce. My fix was Zelda. That's how bad it was. And I pretty much gave up the gaming because I like my wife better. It's close. Don't tell her it's close. But I picked her. So I won't play this game, and I don't even have much tolerance for talking about it. And I got some news for all the fellas on that Twitter machine. Your highlights you put up, those aren't real. You didn't actually coach the team. I don't mean to break your hearts, but it's a game. I can't believe how serious some people take it. And okay, that's cool.
When I saw 2 million folks were playing live online 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, and that was the early release, you had to pay the extra money to go. It's how do we hack EA and be watch Cover 3 podcast after this? Go to Power.
Exactly. I'm surprised they don't do some kind of in-game advertising.
I think they wanted to. There were so many logistical issues this year with putting it out. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes, in the future. I've been over there a couple of times. I'd love to get Cover 3 on there, or just That'd be awesome to have some branding with that.
And if you're K-State, you couldn't have possibly picked a better time to have a quarterback like Avery Johnson.
Oh my
Even though
gosh.
I think their speed is off. I don't think he's one of the faster quarterbacks in college football, according to the game. They might want to
They'll do
adjust.
the roster updates, right?
Yep. So they say. But, you just bringing this full circle, Lincoln Cure was a huge get for Kansas State in the recruiting process, their first 5-star. But it came down to not A&M, where his coach that had recruited him, Colin Klein, was at. It came down to Oregon. Why? Because that's who he played when he was a kid on that damn game.
Yeah.
And so now this is almost like an opportunity for some schools such as Kansas State to win over young fans that turn into viewers and turn into, that's my second team. I don't know.
I need more coaches to play. So we're working on something. I've got enough lined up to where I can say what we're doing now. We're doing bi-week breakdown to where I have you on. We play a game over Twitch, short game, 12, 15 minute, and I interview you. So I've got a few locked in from ACC and Big Ten. And there's some guys that are like my age. Like, man, if you're early 40s, you probably grew up playing this game. And they're like, oh, I don't really play. I'm like, I'm not any good either. Like I've got young kids. I don't have time to play this nonstop. Like, just come on, we'll play. We'll probably play terribly. We'll chop it up, and it'll be a good experience. But like, what good exposure? Hey, this coach plays. Like, that's a non-NIL recruitment tool right there.
Yep, you're right. Right. So it's kind of like your version of the Hot Wings thing.
Yes, exactly. And
I like it.
See how these guys manage games. What plays they call.
You probably belong in this industry. You kind of think like a journalist, even though you're a damn lawyer.
I know.
Why did you get out of that? Other than being an awful way to make a living.
So I just got really blessed that I had a good LSAT day. And so Bama gave me a full ride. So I didn't have that lawyer debt coming out, like a lot of guys come out of law school and they got a whole bunch of debt. And I didn't have any, which was really fortunate. And, Tomahawk was just blowing up at the FSU site. I had started and I had a chance to, kind of help bring on some other SB Nation stuff and get a piece of that. So that was really helpful.
Yeah.
Chase the startup life.
This is more fun.
It is.
This is more fun. Thanks, bud. I appreciate it a ton.
Enjoyed it, man.
Hope to cross paths with you. Why don't you, next time you're in Nashville, why don't you go tell them to have a convention so we can all see each other face to face?
I went to the last convention that we've had.
The one in Nashville?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did too. It was memorable, except the parts I don't remember.
We should have another one.
I know.
I'll call Stanko after this. Tell him.
Yeah, Stanko. I'm sure he watches this. I'm sure he was on it last year, so he should be connected to it. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Be well, Tim. See you, man.
So that was the most conversational one I've had in a while, and I loved it. I absolutely loved that. Just talking to a buddy and going through it, and he's asking questions, I'm asking questions. That's kind of what I want to do on this podcast more often. And Bud, he's done so many interviews himself, conducted them, that he's just really comfortable as I am in this setting. He's a great guy. You should listen to the Cover 3. You should follow him on that Twitter machine if you're inclined to do such things. And just know this: he's a guy that is always really fair in his assessments. Has his opinions. You're not always going to agree with them, but I respect him for this. His opinions are his opinions, and he's not just saying things for clicks or reaction. And I admire that. We're missing that in a lot of sports media now. It's all driven by, let me say something that'll get us some attention, even though I don't believe it. Bud's the real deal, and I appreciate him taking time out of his very busy schedule. He's got a Google Calendar. I had to sign up, like a class that I meet with my teacher at 2:30 on Tuesday, and it worked. He showed up. Appreciate you watching. We'll be back next week with another Life of Fitz. Until then, I'll talk to you real soon. I appreciate you listening to this week's edition of Life of Fitz. And thank you to all the great people at Blueville Nursery for sponsoring our show. This has been a Spirit Street production.